Welcome to the Sound of Ideas from IdeaStream Public Media. I'm Stephanie Haney. Thanks for being with us today. The Center for Christian Virtue began as an anti-pornography group more than 40 years ago, but has since become what the Cincinnati Enquirer recently called a policy powerhouse in Ohio, lobbying both for and against hundreds of bills, from expanding the EdChoice voucher system to banning transgender students from using bathrooms that align with their gender identity. The center's president, Aaron Baer, spoke at the City Club of Cleveland on Friday. City Club CEO Dan Malthrop said the group's major influence in shaping state laws is why Baer was invited to speak. Here's a clip of Baer from the forum saying why what he calls the Christian interpretation of the Bible makes his group the most well-suited to influence lawmaking in Ohio.
I actually think Christians saying, hey, our moral authority, our deciding what is right and wrong is based in this ancient text that has been preserved throughout history, is actually a far more legitimate and valid way of determining right and wrong than most secular Americans. Because at the end of the day, we have to decide what is our authority for deciding what is right and wrong, right? Where are we making that determination? Where does that right come from? And for most folks, what it would just be is what feels right to me. And for Christians, we're saying, hey, this ancient text, interpreted as it has been pretty consistently throughout these last several millennia, is how we make these determinations. And that's why we do that.
While Baer spoke last Friday, protesters lined the street outside the City Club. Now, this was following an open letter signed by more than 100 LGBTQ community and nonprofit leaders who objected to the format of the forum and pointed out the Center for Christian Virtue was designated as an anti-LGBTQ hate group by the Southern Poverty Law Center in 2023. And if you're watching us on the Ohio channel or on the IdeaStream Public Media YouTube page, what you're seeing right now is some footage of those protesters outside the City Club on Friday. Now, today, we're going to spend time talking about this organization and its impact in the state and discuss the reaction to Baer's invitation and speech. Joining me now by phone, we have Jesse Balmert, state government reporter with the Cincinnati Enquirer, who did a deep dive reporting on the Center for Christian Virtue. Jesse, thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
We also have Greg Lawson with us by phone, senior research fellow with the conservative think tank Buckeye Institute. Greg, thanks for being here.
Thank you very much.
And also by phone, Maria Bruno, executive director of the progressive nonprofit Ohioans Against Extremism, also formerly the head of the LGBTQ rights organization Equality Ohio. Maria, thanks for the time today.
Thanks so much for having me.
And here in studio, we have Tom Sutton, PhD, Professor Emeritus of Political Science, formerly at Baldwin-Wallace University. Tom, thanks for being with us.
Good to be with you, Stephanie.
Now, just a note here that City Club CEO Dan Malthrop couldn't be with us today, but he did sit down with me yesterday to talk about some of the criticism we'll be hearing, some of those responses during the show from Dan. Now, if you would like to join the conversation, you can give us a call at 866-578-0903. You can also send us an email at soi@ideastream.org or send us a message on Instagram at The Sound of Ideas. Jesse, if we can, we'd like to start with some background on the Center for Christian Virtue, because you reported on how much the group has grown just in the last decade and how they've become more focused on influencing policy in that time. So, Jesse, can you tell us more about that, please?
Certainly. So CCV started in 1983. It was originally called Citizens for Community Values. It was created in the basement of a Cincinnati Presbyterian church. And for many years, the focus of this organization was some of the things that they opposed were the Robert Mapplethorpe photography exhibit in Cincinnati, which led to obscenity charges against the Arts Center and its director, but the jury threw that out. That drew a lot of attention to Cincinnati. They also they pushed through a ban on Cincinnati laws protecting LGBTQ citizens from discrimination. And then in 2004, the group led a successful ballot initiative to define marriage as between one man and one woman, effectively banning same-sex marriage in Ohio. That was overturned or made moot effectively by the 2015 decision by the U.S. Supreme Court, which was also led by a Cincinnati native, Jim Obergefell. But it really wasn't until 2016 when the longtime leader, Phil Burris, stepped down and was replaced with Aaron Bear, who was the person who spoke to the City Club. They moved the organization to Columbus and more recently set up their headquarters right across from the State House. Continued a lot of the anti-LGBTQ policies that they had been known for, but kind of expanded the number of issues that they were looking at.
Okay, Tom, now we'll ask you about lobbying in general in the State House. Can you give us sort of a breakdown of the wide range of types of lobbyists that might try to connect with lawmakers in Ohio?
Sure, absolutely. This is a combination of the First Amendment right we have at the federal level and certainly in the Ohio Constitution to both free speech, free press, and also to petition the government, which literally means lobbying the government. The wide range, it's almost infinite. So you have industry, you have agriculture, you have education, all the different policy areas, healthcare, and of course here what you have are essentially groups representing religious and moral values who are trying to lobby for the state to act on their behalf to then impose essentially through legislation what they think is necessary and safe and the right for those that they are representing. And then, of course, you have the LGBT community on the same basis, but with obviously a very different position, looking at this more through the lens of personal rights, individual rights that are also protected by the Constitution, by the Ohio Constitution. And quite frankly, these gray areas where it tends to be more of an either or as opposed to a compromise is often the case when it comes to these issues that are defined by one side as morality and by another side as really a question of rights.
Now, Tom, have you seen a change in the amount of faith-based organizations lobbying the State House in recent years?
Yes. I think when you see the conservative trend that has been happening in the country since the 2016 election, it's really sort of a second phase after the first phase that happened in the 1980s with the Reagan administration coming in. Ohio is a largely rural, pocketed by metropolitan area state, so it's a bit unique in that respect. And so not that one or the other necessarily is where you get a lot of this, but generally speaking, the conservative trend politically of this state is being driven in part by the rise of these groups like the Center for Christian Virtue, who are seeking to represent the views of those that support them. Obviously, the growth in their size and their finances, et cetera, is both from local support and from national support. The other is the nationalization of a lot of these groups. And the bottom line is that essentially the cost and the effectiveness of lobbying continues to go up, not just by them, also to some degree by LGBTQ groups. But we are in an environment really where LGBT communities and groups see themselves as essentially under assault, under fire. And this is part of a larger context of American history where you have the tension between majority rule, that's called democracy, and minority rights, which is often protected by law and or by the courts.
I want to remind our audience we are talking about faith-based influence in Ohio's laws. This is in light of the Center for Christian Virtue, which is a Christian lobbying group, having spoken at the City Club of Cleveland on Friday. If you have a question or a comment, you can call 866-578-0903. You can also email us at soi@ideastream.org. Now, in speaking with the City Club's Dan Malthrop, he said the level of influence that CCV has on Ohio politics was key in choosing the host to be at the forum, to host that forum with Aaron Bear. Said that's the leader of the group of CCV. Now, the Buckeye Flame is a newsroom here in Northeast Ohio. It exclusively covers LGBTQ plus issues in the state, and it reported on the City Club forum with CCV, noting Bear's use of anti-transgender and LGBTQ plus exclusionary language. The things that were outlined in that article include falsely asserting that there are only two sexes, denying the existence of intersex people, denying the existence of transgender individuals, misgendering young transgender girls, calling them, quote, dudes in girls' sports, and repeatedly defining, quote, healthy families as one married mother and father pairing. This is from the reporting from the Buckeye Flame. Now, here is a clip now of Bear from the forum using some of the language that's described in that Buckeye Flame reporting.
I think what our priority is, like we saw in the Supreme Court, is primarily keeping biological males out of female sports to ensure fundamental fairness in that, and identify the reality that there are two sexes. If we are silent on massive harm that's being done to children, we are being derelict in our duty. We're not loving people if we say, yeah, it's okay for a dude to play in girls' sports. And when we veil our language in political correctness and we play around with these ideas that are ultimately leading to children being sterilized for life, to 16-year-old girls having their breasts chopped off, and boys having their penis removed. What? Wait a minute. I'm sorry. What? This is what's happening. If you guys don't like what we're talking about here, then you should be upset with the pediatric clinics that are doing these things. If we're not being honest and clear about these are the medical procedures that are happening to kids, then we're not loving our neighbors and we're not being clear.
And to be clear, we have not seen evidence that procedures like those that were just described by Aaron Baer are happening at clinics here in Ohio. So I wanted to note that just for the factual note of the record. And Greg, I want to bring you into this conversation now. Are the views that were expressed by Aaron Baer, their views that you would call mainstream Republican views?
Well, I think that there are views that are shared by a lot of people. I think there's many, probably several million at least Ohioans would have that. Now, I'm sure there's probably several million Ohioans that do not necessarily share those views. But when we're starting to talk about views that are held by a large number of people, I think it's difficult to say that those are inherently fringe ideas. So I would say that, yes, I think that there's broad agreement in certain groups, and there is obviously disagreement among other groups. But I don't necessarily think that these are views that are, outside of what is general mainstream, at least in certain communities throughout the state and really throughout the country. And, I think that the big thing that really comes through loud and clear in this entire situation is that the City Club, allowed there to be an opportunity for there to be freedom of speech and have people ask questions too. I know there's some controversy about exactly how that was formatted and things like that, but people were able to ask questions as they should in a situation like this. And I think that is the best policy when you're talking about trying to defend First Amendment freedom of speech.
I do want to take a moment to clarify when I was talking about the procedures that there's not evidence of happening here in Ohio. I meant specifically not happening to minors, as Baer was referencing 16-year-olds in the statements that were made. Now, Maria, I'll ask you, in the view of Ohioans Against Extremism, the group that you belong to, does what Aaron said there amount to hate speech?
I don't know that I frame much of this around hate speech versus not hate speech. I think what is evident to me as we are viewing these clips is the effort to essentially have government encroach on people's private decisions. As Greg just mentioned, we have millions of people who might agree with Mr. Baer. There's also millions of people who don't. And I think when something like that is in dispute, you have to consider the impact of the actual legislation that this group and others like it tend to forward. And that is legislation that takes rights and decisions away from parents, away from doctors, away from schools, and puts them essentially in the purview of the state legislature. So, I think we can get bogged down into the weeds on which issue and which position on which issue. But I think the more fundamental question is, as he sits there and talks about the morality being the basis for laws, well, I would contend that the basis for laws need to be around the Constitution. And so that is very much a moral and legal framework within which to operate. So I don't know that it is said with the intention to cause harm, but I do think that it has been made very clear by the community that it does cause harm. And so I think that at a minimum, there is significant indifference to the harm of the words that he's saying because he has been told how harmful the language that he is using is.
I want to remind our audience we're talking about faith-based influence in Ohio lawmaking, and if you'd like to be a part of that conversation, that number is 866-578-0903, and our email is soi@ideastream.org. We have a call now from Kathleen in Akron. Kathleen, welcome to the Sound of Ideas. Go ahead.
Hi. I'm not in favor of anything that they say at CCV. I think they're they have a problem. But we can't ignore them. We have to be able to hear them. People who don't like what they say, who just don't want to hear it, are putting all of us at risk. It's like having termites and deciding you don't want to deal with them because they're ugly. You can't do that. Otherwise, they take over. Next thing you know, the floor falls in. We just can't do that.
Kathleen, thank you for sharing your perspective with us. We appreciate it very much. Now, whether CCV uses hate speech was one reason that some people were critical of the City Club for hosting the forum. There was an open letter that was sent to the City Club. It was signed by many of those critics, and that letter reads in part, quote, "We care deeply about the City Club's role in Northeast Ohio as a space for thoughtful civic discussion. That is precisely why this situation is so troubling. By providing unchallenged space to a group with a documented history of spreading harmful misinformation, the City Club risks undermining public trust, especially among marginalized communities. It also risks contributing to a climate that stigmatizes and harms the LGBTQIA2S+ community." Now, I did sit down with Dan Malthrop, as I mentioned, talking about why the City Club chose to host a forum with the Center for Christian Virtue, and Dan had the moment there to respond to criticism. So here's that conversation with Dan. Now, there was criticism from this from members of the Northeast Ohio community, particularly from members of the LGBTQ+ community. One of the reasons that there was criticism that they stated they were unhappy with this decision to have this forum with the leader of the Center for Christian Virtue is related to the frequently asked questions section on the City Club's website. So on the website, it says that the City Club does not protect hate speech. A quote from that is that the City Club is, quote, "not a venue for anyone who would advance a policy of bigotry or supremacy." So when you look at hosting Aaron Baer and the organization, the Center for Christian Virtue, that was something that people thought was not in line with what showed up on the City Club's website. During the forum, Baer denied the existence of transgender individuals and misgendered trans youth, calling them, quote, "dudes in girls' sports," which the Buckeye Flame claims defies the City Club's hate speech policy. So what do you think about that?
Well, when he began talking in those ways, I pointed out that that was exactly the kind of rhetoric that the LGBT community and allies feel is inflammatory. So we did our best to push back and to point out the real problem with that kind of rhetoric. I think that this issue is incredibly complicated right now. I think that things that we classified as hate speech, which were, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, it was very clear that hate speech, what was hate speech and what wasn't, and hate speech was just not a part of mainstream speech and mainstream dialogue. And today, that kind of rhetoric has become mainstream rhetoric because of the politics of our country today. I don't know what to do about that. I find it to be one of the most challenging things about leading the City Club and protecting a platform where we have conversations about and with the people who are shaping the future of policy in the state of Ohio. And finding, our job is to find ways to do that effectively include as many people as possible. It is not our intention to protect hate speech. The Constitution does that. That's not our job. But it is our intention to try to create moments where and opportunities for the community to better understand who has influence over the future of our state and our communities.
With that statement on the City Club's website, it's not necessarily in your bylaws, it's not a mission, it's not necessarily that. It might be construed to be a promise to the community. I'm not sure exactly how you would describe that statement being on your website. But when you think about that, have you thought about where do you draw the line when you talk about hate speech being a part of the mainstream conversation now, who you might turn down, who would not be welcome at the City Club?
We think about that all the time. It is really, really difficult. I don't think that folks who, if if the Center for Christian Virtue was not as influential and important in the state of Ohio as they are, I think it would have been a much more challenging proposition to invite them to speak from our stage. As people were asking us and encouraging us to have them speak, it would have been much more difficult to say, yes, that's a great idea. So it is something we think about all the time, something we discuss at the board level. I have 35 board members at the City Club, and we meet every other month. We have a meeting next week, and I'm sure we'll be discussing this. I mean, a lot of people could credibly accuse the presidential administration of engaging in hate speech, right? But if somebody from the administration wants to speak at the City Club, they're going to get the platform. So how do we manage that? Mm-hmm. It's and then where then do you begin to draw that? Where you begin to draw that line is a very, very difficult decision, one we don't take lightly, and one we bring to the board as often as possible.
Do you think then, based on criticism that you've received with what's on the website and the difficulties in determining this, is it maybe time for an update to the website on what will be part of the conversation at the City Club?
Yeah, it might be.
That was Dan Moulthrop, the CEO of the City Club of Cleveland, talking about the decision to host the forum with Aaron Baer, the leader of the Center for Christian Virtue. Now, Greg, as we mentioned, there was a call for the City Club not to host Aaron Baer, or if they did, to balance his views with a counter voice. What do you think about that, Greg?
Well, I definitely think that an effort to not have them at all would be a mistake. I think that would clearly show that you're not having the freedom of speech. I think it also, to the point the caller earlier made, whether you agree or disagree with the positions that they hold, they do have influence. They should be heard. People should understand them just as they should be able to understand a lot of different ideas that are out there. We should be able to openly debate them. Former Supreme Court Justice Louis Brandeis said sunlight is the best disinfectant. He was talking about government transparency in that context, but I think that's a pretty good way of thinking about freedom of speech, making sure that ideas are getting vetted, that there's adequate opportunity for people to engage. Now, if the format had been modified some, I'm not sure that would have necessarily been a problem. I've actually done events at the City Club. I've been part of panel discussions where the perspective that I had or the Buckeye Institute had was different from some of the other individuals on the panel, and we were able to have what I think was a pretty robust debate. And I don't think anybody should be afraid of having a robust debate in that kind of forum. But I definitely don't think that they should have been not allowed to speak at all. I think that would have been a major mistake and would not have reflected well on the defense of the First Amendment.
Maria, what do you think of the forum? Why do some critics say there's harm in hearing those ideas without a counter voice present in the moment?
So I think it is less about denying them the opportunity to talk more than, there's a big difference between saying you have the right to say something and offering someone a microphone without any counterpoints in real time. These conversations are very nuanced and require a degree of specialized knowledge, and I wouldn't necessarily have expected the City Club to themselves have that knowledge. But I can tell you that I heard several I would argue intellectually dishonest talking points that one might not be able to call out in real time unless you also have a subject matter expertise in some of these issues. So I think it's a matter of an unchecked microphone without any fact checking in real time or pushback on some of the presumptions that are made with what they're saying. That does not serve the audience because it could leave the audience with a false impression of what's going on. I think a panel would have done much more to have an honest conversation and a more well-rounded conversation. So I'm disappointed that that's the format that they picked. I think the other question is, how did they end up hosting them? I mean, even when we talked about, government leaders, for example, saying the same speech, well, this group is not a government entity. They did not, it's unclear to me how they ended up taking the stage without anyone around them. And I wasn't in the room when those decisions were being made, but I think there's a big difference between a sitting elected official, for example, and an an individual interest group that has exercised disproportionate power already.
We have an email now from David B. in Cleveland Heights, and I want to remind people if they'd like to participate in the conversation, the email is soi@ideastream.org, and the number to call is 866-578-0903. David B. in Cleveland Heights writes, I haven't seen that City Club forum yet, but have followed the issue. I have great respect for Dan Moulthrop and the City Club. My question for your panel today is how do they think Mr. Moulthrop handled the forum? Did he question or challenge the facts in the same way that he usually would? Also, David notes here, it's important to realize that the City Club has a board that makes the decisions, not just one person. Greg, I'll ask you, how do you think Dan handled the forum?
I think it's always difficult to handle any kind of forum where there's touchy subjects, where people are going to have a pretty significant difference of opinion. I'm sure there's going to be ongoing critique. I thought Dan did, try to inject what some of the critiques of CCV are out there, raise those issues. He brought them up. You can argue about whether or not it was as prosecuted maybe as well as some people might think, and whether or not, it would have been, arguable to have another person come in and do the moderating. But I also think that importantly, there was an opportunity for some folks in the audience to ask questions, as there always is, or at least usually is. And I think that's entirely correct. That is how that kind of a discussion forum should happen. So there were some folks who were able to ask questions. So you can always argue, you can always have concerns. I don't think it was bad. I think there was some pushback, whether or not you believe there should have been more. I'm sure, again, there'll be that perspective. But this is always a very, dicey and difficult thing. Obviously, that's why sometimes forums can sometimes be a little bit better. And in my experience, I've certainly done my fair share of those. And I certainly appreciate the opportunity to have some back and forth in that. But no, I think overall it was reasonably well done.
Maria, would you like to share your thoughts on how the forum was handled?
I think that I just will reiterate that I would have liked to see someone with a little bit more subject matter expertise in real time be able to push back. I don't think there was anything wrong with how Dan went about sort of structuring the conversation and trying to keep everyone, make sure everyone has the opportunity to participate. But I guess my critique would be I would have liked to see much more sort of fact checking and questioning of the premises of some of the assertions made.
We had a call in from Steve. Steve couldn't stay on the line, but Steve was wondering about tolerance paradox. Steve said if a society is tolerant of intolerant people, it ends up harming vulnerable communities, and went on to say that people were commenting about this on the City Club coverage. And so I'll turn to you, Tom. I'll ask you now. What do you think about the idea that Dan brought up about hate speech being more part of the mainstream conversation now, and also being more agreed upon 10 years ago in terms of what is actually hate speech? Is that in line with what you're seeing in politics?
Yes, definitely. There are things that are being said on a regular basis, whether it's throwing in the terms of communist and Marxist and fascist, or it's talking about people who are trans, the whole issue of gender identity, et cetera, the push against all of that we were seeing moving forward from their perspective under the Biden administration. It's becoming normal. It's becoming normalized. Now, that's one thing that's sort of a reflection of where we are as a society. There's been a lot of polarization. It's been building for many years. On the other hand, there's the concern and, quite frankly, the fear by those that are part of these minority communities. And when you talk about, in particular, people who are trans and families that have children who are identifying as such or are thinking that they identify as such, that is a tiny, tiny group in our total population. And so for them, the fear is real and it's growing because it's that concern that what becomes normalized as everyday speech, whether it's from public officials or the community or interest groups, at what point does that start to devolve into more serious kinds of things like legislation, discrimination, persecution? Because we've seen this happen in world history before, and quite frankly, we've seen it in our own country. I would just add to this that the layers of concern, this is particularly complicated in part because we're talking about the content of that discussion was about children. And when you talk about children, on the one hand, a conservative perspective might be this is the family's concern, the family's decision, nobody should interfere with it. On the other hand, quite frankly, the state ultimately in the United States is responsible for child welfare. If a child is perceived to be, or evidence shows there's abuse, there's neglect, or any other thing that significantly harms that child, the state has the right to go in at the county level here and intervene, hopefully to keep the family together, but to treat the child, to take care of the child, and if necessary, to remove the child. Under those circumstances, which are quite normal, we've been doing that for over a century, you can see where the argument comes in. If you truly believe that someone is being subjected to, or the parents think it's the right thing for the child to go through these treatments because they identify as trans or they want to be, that maybe this is the time for some kind of state intervention, which for all intents and purposes is what House Bill 68 did. That's where the tension is. Is it the family's responsibility? Is it the doctor's responsibility? Or is it the state's responsibility? And I think that's really the crux of what all of this comes down to, particularly in the context of this debate.
We're here talking about faith-based influence in Ohio legislation in light of an event that was held at the City Club Forum last week, hosting the leader of the Center for Christian Virtue, which is a large Christian lobbying organization. We're going to take a quick break now, and we'll be back in just a moment here on The Sound of Ideas. I'm Stephanie Haney. Welcome back to The Sound of Ideas. I'm Stephanie Haney. Today we are talking about faith-based influence in Ohio politics and legislation. This is in light of an event that was held at the City Club of Cleveland, where the leader of the Center for Christian Virtue was hosted there for a forum. If you'd like to be a part of this conversation, you can give us a call at 866-578-0903. You can also email us at soi@ideastream.org. We do have a call now from Edward in Cincinnati. Edward, welcome to The Sound of Ideas. Go ahead.
I'm a Vietnam veteran, and I'm a disabled veteran, and I support people that are gay and lesbian, and I've been to 20 different marches in Cincinnati, and I think these right-wing Christians need to read their Bible more often and show love for the human race, and their bigotry is right wing, and it smarts on fascism, and we don't need fascists in this country. That's my comments.
Edward, thank you for sharing your perspective with us here on The Sound of Ideas. For those just joining us, we have a panel with us discussing faith-based influence in Ohio politics today. With me in studio, we have Tom Sutton, PhD, Professor Emeritus of Political Science, formerly at Baldwin Wallace University. On the phone, we are joined by Greg Lawson, Senior Research Fellow with the conservative think tank, the Buckeye Institute, as well as Maria Bruno, Executive Director of the progressive nonprofit Ohioans Against Extremism, also formerly the head of the LGBTQ rights organization Equality Ohio, and then reporter Jesse Balmert, state government reporter with the Cincinnati Enquirer, who did a deep dive reporting on the Center for Christian Virtue. We have a clip now that we'll play of Bear at the City Club Forum talking about what CCV does in terms of lobbying and his argument that it doesn't amount to the unconstitutional combination of church and state. Let's hear that now.
Rape ought to be illegal is a deeply Christian belief. We go out and vote for that, right? We should have laws that protect against rape or human trafficking. Is that me forcing my religion on someone? No, nobody would say that, because that's something we all generally agree on. It's just when we say we ought not to have child murder in unborn children, that's when all of a sudden it's religion. And that doesn't make sense. That doesn't hold water.
Jesse, you did extensive reporting on the legislation that the Center for Christian Virtue has been involved in both getting passed and blocking in Ohio. Can you break that down for us?
Certainly. There's a lot of different pieces of legislation that they have worked on, including some that we've touched on, but they have supported banning DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion in public schools. They would like to require parents' consent for kids to download certain apps and so forth. They oppose pornography type legislation. And then there's laws that have gone in that they have been instrumental in passing, such as advocating for an expansion of Ohio's EdChoice vouchers, which essentially allows taxpayer dollars to pay for private education. They've also been instrumental in the ban on gender affirming care in Ohio for minors, and a variety of other pieces of legislation. Also, you can see like Aaron Bear in the background as Governor Mike DeWine signs Ohio's most restrictive abortion ban, which proponents call the Heartbeat Bill. Opponents say it's more like a 6-week ban on abortion. And so, unlike some other groups that maybe specialize on one particular topic, I think about, the Catholic organization is a lobbying group in Ohio. But CCV is really kind of stretched across a variety of different topics.
We have a call now from Jerry in University Heights. Jerry, welcome to the Sound of Ideas. Go ahead.
Hi, excuse me. I'm a Christian. I'm an American. Those two things are not the same. Because what the Center for Christian Virtues is saying is that the Bible says this, therefore it is so, and therefore it must be the law. That is not how this country works. It can't be. And the founders saw firsthand what a toxic combination religion and governance would be from the Church of England and from their own experience as colonies and then as states. That's why we have separation of church and state. That's why there's no religious test for office.
Jerry, thank you very much for sharing your perspective with us here on The Sound of Ideas. We appreciate it. Greg, you've worked at the Buckeye Institute for almost 20 years. So I'd like to ask your input on this. Have faith-based organizations gotten more involved in policy in Ohio over that time, or has that influence always been present to the same degree that we're seeing it now?
Well, I think it's always been present. I think, as Jesse mentioned earlier, CCV under different leadership and a different name at the time, but was very involved in grassroots efforts, grassroots policy, state constitutional amendments. So there's always been that kind of an involvement. Now, I do think CCV has grown. I think it has a much larger state house presence. I spend a lot of time at the state house. We don't work on a lot of the same issues. We do work a little bit on the same issue relative to school choice. We were supportive of EdChoice at the Buckeye Institute for a variety of reasons. So, there's occasional cross-pollination, but generally we do different issue sets. But I think they have grown. I think that they've become a sophisticated organization. But there's lots of sophisticated organizations out there. Again, I think as we were talking earlier, every business group, every association usually has somebody somewhere that's representing them, because government is such a large and influential thing. When government decisions can make or break a business or make or break a whole wide range of things, you're going to have people who can help you petition the government and work on it. So yes, I think there's been a little bit of growth within the state house itself, but I think it's always been prevalent. I think it's always been out there. I think there's been citizen activists that have had influence on individual lawmakers for a long period of time. So I don't know that it's a fundamental change. It may be more of an incremental change.
We have an email now from Audrey in Cleveland Heights. Audrey writes, I wish I would have been able to go to the City Club CCV forum wearing an Episcopalians for Trans Youth t-shirt. Please share that not all Christians oppose LGBTQ plus rights. There are many of us that support and care for LGBTQ plus youth. Did you see all of the churches represented at the Pride Parade? Many communities of faith are fully accepting. Audrey in Cleveland Heights, thank you for sharing your comment with us here on The Sound of Ideas. One note on the CCV support of the EdChoice expansion, the voucher system for schools. That is something that CCV is directly involved in. They have been been sharing the fact that they opened 15 schools since 2022. That is another thing that CCV does, to share that information with people. Now, Maria, you have experience with both an LGBTQ rights organization and now work on fighting extremism in the state with Ohioans Against Street Extremism. Are there ways the laws that we talked about, that Jesse described for us, are impacting the LGBTQ plus community that aren't immediately obvious on the surface?
Yeah, and I think, to Greg's point about the influence always being present, I think that's true. I think the difference now, though, is the entrenched power that one party has at the state house. I think the political incentives have shifted quite a bit from trying to keep that mainstream moderate Ohio position to doing whatever the party leaders whatever pleases them, because that's who ultimately picks the leadership in this state. I think that's a real shift in the political dynamics of the state, even though these voices have always been around. I think as far as the impact, I personally know families that I used to work with doing advocacy around these bills who have had to move out of the state altogether. I mean, these are, when we talk about HB 68, for example, on one side it was Center for Christian Virtue and their allies. On the other, it was parents, doctors, and trans kids. And those were all of the people, advocating against it. Pretty much all of the people that would actually be directly impacted from the bill were against this bill. So as a result, we have families that now have to make completely different choices about getting medical care for their kids, but also just dealing with the fallout that is from the rhetoric. We have, I know personally, again, multiple trans youth who have been subjected to intense bullying because of the rhetoric that has been pursued by adults in this state is now being adopted by kids in this state. And so I think there is a degree of normalizing that hateful rhetoric that has gotten worse over the last few years as these political incentives have shifted.
We have a call from Nancy now in Cleveland. Nancy, welcome to The Sound of Ideas. Go ahead.
Hi, I just wanted to say your panelists are exactly right. Everyone deserves the right to free speech, but everyone doesn't deserve the platform to broadcast that speech. And when hate speech and far-right organizations are allowed to broadcast, they're normalized. And that's how hate speech gets normalized, through that broadcasting to everybody and seemingly supporting it. So when it's on a platform and a news platform like NPR, you bend over backwards to both sides it, and then you end up not criticizing one side because you don't want to seem like you're biased against them.
Thank you for calling in, Nancy. We appreciate it, and for sharing your perspective. Tom, does that seem like a trend that's happening, the conversation on deplatforming? Is there more of a move to not want to engage with people that people disagree with?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And when you look at the pressure that's been put on institutions, and of course, we're sitting in one that has had a major impact because the federal funding for public radio and public broadcasting has been completely eliminated. Now, that's been a longstanding policy goal of the Republican Party, and they finally achieved it under Trump and the Republican majority in Congress. I think what you're seeing, though, to Maria's point, is that because of this normalization of rhetoric that continues to move more and more to an orthodox position of not only do we stand against some of these things as a religious belief, we believe it is in the best interests of the state, of the communities, and even of these families and children to legislate this. This is where you get into that issue of church and state separation. Like Maria, I've had students who are trans. I have personal friends, and they do feel like they are under a veil of persecution because of what the polarization of this country has done in this particular issue. It's not just one side versus the other, it's us versus them. That kind of dynamic, and when them is a small minority, when it's a group that it's an issue also that for all of us as humans is one of the deepest levels of identity, gender and sexual orientation. That adds a whole nother layer of intensity to these debates and these discussions. And is it just a debate? Is it more debate is needed? Or does that debate spill over into creating the perception and reality of potential harm for some of these children?
At the City Club Forum, Baer dismissed concerns about the Center for Christian Virtue imposing its views on the public by talking about the buck stopping with the voter. So here's that clip from the forum.
Actually, if you look at the nature of what CCV does, we work in a process by which, hey, we say, here's the direction we think we should go. Representative Miller, what way do you think we should go? And Speaker Huffman, which way do you think we should go? And we say, okay, if we can get 50 people in the House that agree on this is the direction we think we should go, let's do that. So the idea that we force our beliefs on people or that we're uncompromising, no, we come with a perspective and say this is the things we think we should do. And if you agree, then let's vote yes.
I want to thank people for calling in and emailing in to participate in this conversation about faith-based influence on Ohio's lawmaking and politics. We do have a lot of things to get to. We will get to as many calls and email comments as we can. Now, Tom, to the conversation that Baer was just having that was from the forum about the buck stopping with the voter, how does gerrymandering affect what Baer had to say there about getting the votes in the State House?
It has a huge effect because essentially when the Constitution was written, the power to determine how congressional districts would be drawn was given to the states. This was in some ways a compromise, and they certainly didn't anticipate the kind of situation that we have now, though the dynamics of power are very simple. If you are the majority party, whether it's Democrat or Republican, you're going to do everything you can to maximize your advantage, and that is done through gerrymandering. We've seen it this year with California and Texas and other states doing this to try to gerrymander to get a majority in the U.S. House of Representatives. The problem with what Mr. Baer said is that it's not just about people lobbying through their organizations. It is also about the fact that these majorities get created in the legislature who honestly believe they're representing their people, but who they're really representing are the people that are in a majority district for their party, and the lines have been drawn in a way to essentially preference one party over the other. I think the legislators need to remember, number one, that you are supposed to represent every resident of your district, not just those that voted for you, though it's easy to forget. And number two, this goes back to the point I made earlier related to majority rule, that's what a democracy is all about, versus minority rights, which is really both an issue of legislation and an issue of judicial ruling. So really gerrymandering is a problem across this country. Ohio is certainly a part of that. Until we get objective, nonpartisan kinds of lines drawn, we're going to continue to see this kind of pattern.
One thing I do want to note from Jesse's reporting is that it did note that CCV doesn't donate a lot to candidates in ballot campaigns, but CCV did donate $5,000 to oppose the 2024 ballot measure that would have established a citizen redistricting commission here in Ohio, which would have overcome gerrymandering in Ohio. We have a call now from Tom in Lakewood. Tom, welcome to the Sound of Ideas. Go ahead.
Hello, I'm Tom Falcone, the president of PFLAG Cleveland. We've been in existence over 40 years. And our main concern with the coverage was the non-pushback on the falsehoods that were presented and the allowing of the grandstanding of Mr. Baer to keep pushing ideas and falsehoods. No one under the age of 18 is allowed to have surgery, any kind of lopping off of breasts or penises. And then they push for the lobbying of parents being able to choose and have full funding to send their kids to school, but they want to take away the right of a parent to work with their counselors, their doctors, and within their family to determine the future of their trans children. We see so many an increase since all this rhetoric has started. And his falsehood of the clinics pushing it, the clinics came to be because of a need within the community, a need for people to have places to go, feel safe, and learn to be their and grow to be their authentic selves, whether it's through sexual orientation or gender identity. We at PFLAG support and we lead with love, not hate, and we include all people. We try to help families to reconcile and to understand what's going on and to come to a full meaning of family and through honesty and respect.
Tom, thank you so much for calling in to the Sound of Ideas. We appreciate that very much. I want to thank our panel for participating with us today. Here in studio, we have Tom Sutton, PhD, Professor Emeritus of Political Science, formerly at Baldwin-Wallin University. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Stephanie.
On the phone, Jesse Balmert, state government reporter with the Cincinnati Enquirer. Jesse, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Also, Greg Lawson, senior research fellow with the conservative think tank Buckeye Institute. Greg, thanks for the time.
Thank you very much.
And Maria Bruno, executive director of the progressive nonprofit Ohioans Against Extremism. Maria, thanks very much.
Thanks so much.
To get the last word on today's topics, you can email us at soi@ideastream.org. Tomorrow on The Sound of Ideas, it's the Friday Reporters Roundtable with Mike McIntyre. This week, he's joined by IdeaStream reporter Gabriel Kramer and Kelly Beyer from the Canton Repository. For every episode of The Sound of Ideas on demand, listen wherever you get your podcasts and watch the show on the IdeaStream Public Media YouTube page. You can also hear a rebroadcast of today's show tonight at 9 on 89.7 WKSU. I'm Stephanie Haney. Thank you for keeping the conversation going. Have a great weekend, everyone. I'll be back with you on Monday.